Browns have a defensive coordinator. The playoffs are underway, and Jadeveon Clowney gave the saddest apology heard in Cleveland in quite some time. Here we are, off season, unfortunately, while everybody else is still going. But the good news is the Browns.
Everybody else. It's not.
Yeah, I mean
else.
the Browns got the Browns got their guy. And I'll tell you the same thing I said last week. I didn't have a rooting interest in terms of this was the guy they had to have. I don't have enough information to make that judgment. We'll get into that whole thing because I found a lot of different options very intriguing based on what I've read about them, including a guy people have like irrationally hated already in Sean Desai. The very interesting guy. But anyway, so Jim Schwartz is their guy. I think he sort of, to use a political term, he plays to the base in a lot of ways. He's a proven name. We love name brands. He's obviously got a very distinguished track record, has had a lot of success, has a Super Bowl ring from not too far back, checks a lot of those sort of boxes, deals in some of the things that a lot of people were unhappy with defensively. So, and there's a lot of good reasons that the Browns could make that hire, not the least of which is it probably requires the least major changes on that side of the ball, both in terms of personnel and responsibility that they could have done. So that's where we're at. Initial impressions, Bri, I know you were sending me drawings all day of all the things you hope that this team's going to run this coming season. So where are we at?
Yes, Pete, I just could not wait to dive into the Browns defensive, how it was going to look on paper, all of the tools that could fit within his typical sets that he runs, all the personnel changes. Yeah, I just, in fact, I didn't even know the Browns hired a defensive coordinator until you texted me.
I had to cover my bases on that just in case.
Yeah, Pete's like, hey, Bri, we have a podcast tonight. Just want to make sure you saw the Browns actually hired a defensive coordinator. No, I had heard in the morning that they were pretty close into making their decision after wrapping up their interviews. So I was anticipating maybe an announcement, but thought that maybe they could make us wait a couple of more or so days. And I think when we left the podcast last week, I was pretty dead set on Brian Flores. But even if not him, I liked the idea of Schwartz just based on the fact that he had some head coaching experience coming into this role. And when I saw the news of Flores interviewing for the Cardinals position, Pete, I kind of felt like at that point he was probably out of the running of defensive coordinator. Not because I think that there's a chance that he could take that job. I just think that there may be potentially other opportunities coming his way, whether that's this year or even next year, to be in a stable organization like the Steelers. You know, in his mind, it's stable. And I think the Browns have proven that there's just a lot of unknowns there. And as much as I would have liked to have seen him join this team and join this coaching staff specifically, disappointed about that, but also understand from his perspective how he could potentially land in a better spot for him. So I'm fine with it. Honestly, I felt pretty comfortable talking myself into every guy on their interview list. And it was funny that the name that came up over the weekend was Brandon Staley from the Chargers, which I know we're going to get into a little bit. But yeah, it was kind of funny how I was just able to say, okay, whatever they land on, it's fine. I'll talk myself into it. I always do in the offseason, talk myself into the Browns making the right decisions. And like I said last week, I have a lot of reservations, Pete, going into next year. I'm coming into this season with a very guarded heart. So I will not be won over by articles and press conferences and all. Wait. The video that was circulating today about Jim Harbaugh. What was that? Did you see that?
So way back when Jim Schwartz was the head coach of the Detroit Lions and Jim Harbaugh at that point would have been with San Francisco. Right? Yeah. Those two had a almost fight at a post-game handshake.
I can't.
You know, I joked about this and some people took it way too seriously. It was like, you know, for a certain segment of Browns fans, they won't care that he's super into numbers and analytics and all that stuff because he almost got into a fight with Michigan's head coach. That was enough.
Okay. So I did see that video circulating and I was like, it's so funny to your point of, the football guys. We talked about this. They want someone that yells and gets aggressive and spits, and I don't know, that's what they need to see. So I guess they got their guy.
Yes.
But as you mentioned, probably also win for the analytical nerds if that's his thing too. So maybe
He's a big nerd
guy.
He's
Yeah,
a big
well,
nerd.
listen, can you be both, Pete? Can you be both?
Well,
is he a fraud? He's going to be a fraud to the football guys if you say this.
You would think, given that both Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry played football.
Nobody thinks they're football guys, Pete. Nobody thinks they're football guys. They don't yell and they don't spit.
So
okay.
Yeah, I'm completely screwed up because I keep coming back to this image of like what Browns fans want in their defensive coordinator, and I keep coming back to like Teddy Roosevelt punching a kangaroo or something.
Listen, Pete, they want to stroll down the Muni lot, just pick out a random 40-year-old man that's belching after chugging a beer, and like that's who they want as their football coach. Okay,
I am 100% convinced that the best thing anyone could do that was going to take that job is to cut what effectively is a wrestling promo. Just that we're going to go out there and we're going to take it to them. And we're, like basically what Dan Campbell did with Detroit. Like, that visceral reaction. It's like, they're
the rah.
All the guys who sort of gave crap to women who were like, oh, Kevin Stefanski's handsome. There is undoubtedly a portion of that group that secretly wishes that Mike Vrabel would hold them all night long and keep them safe. Like like you can't get away.
Well, they write their fanfic drafts.
Yes. So Jim Schwartz does a lot of these things. Like I said, he's an interesting guy. And the funny thing is, like, everybody thinks he's gonna be like this yelling screamer. That's really not what he is. He is a passionate guy. He is a guy who's going to get his point across, but he's not a loud guy. I should say he's publicly more reserved, more stoic, which is going to drive people nuts. But at the same time, like, he's very good. He's been very good at his job. He went to Georgetown. Like,
yes,
he's a Ravens season ticket holder. I hope people are aware of that. And I know we're going to get 1,000 questions of, well, you were slappy back in '93. Talk about, the full circle all these years later, coming back to where it all started and all that crap. And that's fine. Like I said, there's a fan service element to this hire. That's not the reason they made this hire, nor is it insurance in case they feel like they've got to fire Stefanski and have a head coach there.
That's actually my favorite theory out of all of this, are the people that are like, we have to have someone that's ready to take over. I'm like, is that really what you want to be thinking about as you're hiring your defensive coordinator? No, absolutely. They're not making this hire and basing it on the fact that they're thinking they're going to get rid of their head coach mid-season next year. That actually would be a colossal disaster if that is how we are operating things around here. Like, no,
you're 100% right.
So many more problems if that is what we're doing.
If that was ever in their thought process, they should have just fired Stefanski.
Exactly.
And just said, we're not doing this because then we've wasted time. They don't think that way, and we read way too much into what we think they want to do. We go, oh, well, of course he's on the hot seat and all this. And I assume if they have a disastrous season that they're going to go in a different direction. But at the same time, like, to me, I felt like the Browns made a hire from a position of strength. First, people thought, that Stefanski won't fire Joe Woods. He doesn't have the heart to do that. He's not that guy, despite the fact he unceremoniously just said, get out to Baker Mayfield and got the most controversial quarterback on the planet. He's not afraid. And like, we have this notion that like he's weak or something when he's just very much who he is, which is something I find refreshing. He's never pretending to be something he isn't. And I think that's part of the reason that like there is a segment of fans who will never get him, and they will never understand why players really like him, because they want consistency. They want the guy who's going to be the same to them every day, because they have to know what they're coming into. They have to know what to expect and everything else, both in how they're treated, what their thought process is the moment they walk through the door. And then when it comes to some of the stuff that's like embarrassing, Myles Garrett's car wreck, or various discipline issues where he's not going to go out there and be like, this guy's a dipshit for doing X, Y, and Z. Like you have to set that tone. You hire a guy like Jim Schwartz and you can, read into that. Well, Jim Schwartz may never get another head coaching job, or you think this is why he's taking the job. Either way, I think Kevin Stefanski and the hiring process took the guy they felt like was the best fit for who they were. To your point, I think Brian Flores thinks he's going to get that job in Arizona, or at least feels good about his chances. They just hired a GM with significant Patriots roots. Obviously, that's where Brian Flores originally came from. It would make sense. Is that a good idea? I don't know. But Brian Flores clearly thinks of himself as a head coach. That is, when he looks himself in the mirror in the morning or whatever, he says, I'm a head coach. So that's what he's going for. And that's fine. Even if the Browns hired him, this would be Jack Duffin's dream, which was hire Brian Flores 1 year. He gets a head coaching job. We get 2 third-round picks. Then they hire Sean Desai. The next year he comes in, go get hired somewhere else. They get 2 more third-round picks. And we just keep running this cycle of minority candidates through to exploit that process to continue getting draft assets. I think, and to borrow something I heard from Jake Burns and guys over the OBR, I think they found their Bill Callahan on defense, a guy who has been a head coach, but sort of understands what he is and wants to be great at this thing where he's clearly got a track record for success. That is, to me, how they approach this. And the benefit they get is Jim Schwartz doesn't need a runway. He doesn't need 2 seasons to get this thing sorted out. He can come in, and he's proven this. He can get results right now. Now, presumably in this discussion of hiring him, the Browns basically told him, no, we're going to fix the defensive line. That's going to happen, because I assume if he said, I'm not going out there with these guys, and they basically said, no, we're going to take care of this. We're going to get you. Yeah. Like my whole thing was just have a nice wide net and interview quality candidates. I think they did that. Ultimately, if they pick the right guy, or if any of these guys would have been the right guy, or they're all great. Right. But, you look at what's being hired around the league right now. I think everybody can sort of look at this and go, no, the Browns made a very credible hire, when a lot of people, the inferiority complex that is being a Cleveland sports fan assumed, they're going to have to get some other joker who's not ready for this job, who nobody else wanted, and all this. And they get a guy who's, like I said, has a Super Bowl ring, has years of success, is one of 2 coaches since Bobby Ross in 1999 to take the Detroit Lions to the playoffs. And he's kind of a prick in a way that might be beneficial for Kevin Stefanski, and pushing him and getting him to sort of, I don't want to say, change who he is, but I think just sort of have to be sort of more on his toes in terms of how he thinks about things and defending himself and his thought process and stuff. And you talked about this last week, and specifically saying, getting a former head coach, they may have some better ways of doing certain things, which could be super helpful.
Yeah. And I hope that is the approach out of all of this. It's not to essentially put Kevin Stefanski in his place by any means, but just getting another mind in this whole process of how we run things, how things are operated on a day-to-day basis, how we manage game planning, and having just another person to bounce things off of. I mean, from what we've seen so far with Kevin Stefanski is that there doesn't seem to be ego involved. So I would think out of all people, he's very open-minded in that approach and that mindset. And I don't think that he's going to be insecure about it. I think the other thing to think about too is, even if their personalities outwardly are different, Kevin Stefanski is very even-keeled. He is the same person, as you mentioned. If Jim Schwartz does have more passion behind him, or if he is outwardly more emotional, that's not a bad thing either. I think if anything, it could be very complimentary. Like, you don't want to work with people that are just like you. It's good to have different personalities, different mindsets, different dynamics within a locker room. Because, there are going to be some guys that may react or respond to that type of leadership a little bit differently than they would to Kevin Stefanski. But by no way do I think that this hire discredits Kevin Stefanski and or puts him on the hot seat in any type of way as we think about next year. I am interested, Pete, to hear what he has to say. Is there going to be a press conference introductory
Unclear.
one?
I
Okay.
assume it's just a question of whether it's going to be in person or Zoom. He's going to do something.
Yeah.
I can't imagine they haven't officially announced the hiring. They don't do that until the actual pen to
Official.
paper, which presumably would be the same day or the next day after doing that. So yeah, we don't know. Allegedly, the official announcement is going to come to. We're recording this on Tuesday. Is going to come on Wednesday. And then we'll see from there. And yeah, I'm very interested in a number of things. Yes, I said. Along with that, you mentioned having different personalities is valuable. I would argue what you're asking from your offense versus your defense requires, well, I won't say requires, but tends to lend itself to different personality types.
Right.
If you're an offense, you're motivated by, other than being an offensive lineman, you are motivated by the reality that you could get the ball and you can go score points. And defense is more of being pushed to work harder because you are, defense by its very nature is asking to lose as slowly as possible. Like that's, it's hard to, it's not always easy to work under those conditions. Like offensively, you can always sort of ramp yourself up of, oh, this time I can go and we can score points, or whatever. Like there's always that thing where defense is like, man, we're getting killed out here. How do I, find the sort of the drive to do that? So,
right. Especially if you're not a star player, right? Like I feel like there's a lot of not pressure necessarily, but there's a lot more blame, I think, to be had when you're on the defensive side of the ball.
Absolutely.
On the offensive side, obviously, there's a lot of pressure when it comes to the quarterback and, wide receivers. But more so, I do agree with you. Like on the defensive side, there's a lot of pressure. So I do think it's important, whoever they hire there, that as we've talked about, like this unit is very, very young. And like you've been talking about, Pete, there are so many guys on this roster who haven't even played for another team. Like we are at a point where the starters on this defense have only been with the Browns organization. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's all they know.
Right.
And I do think that there's a lot of work to be done just in general in getting them back mentally into a position to succeed.
Right. We've talked about, and we sort of mentioned last week that the offense, I think we would both call it a professional operation.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, like, and again, by its very nature, offense can require a different type of coaching. Like you can be a very logical, just X's and O's, figure stuff out, problem solver guy, and have a lot of success because offensive players are generally more motivated. For example, Bri, in your illustrious athletic career, did you like having the ball more or did you like playing defense more?
Actually, a little bit of both.
Oh, yeah? I
did. I love playing defense. Hey, Pete, I think I still hold the record for steals in a game.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
So I was very motivated on defense.
Were you a slap the floor type defender?
Yes, and it is clear that I have passed that on to my son because my son is very stagnant on offense right now, but loves playing defense in both basketball and football.
I have not gotten clips from his basketball career. I'm going
to have to send you them. I mean,
I'm very familiar with his football career highlights.
I'll send you some after this.
That's interesting. Anyway, that's always interesting because you played sports where you have to do both. So it's always, some people are less inclined to give full effort on the defensive end. You can be logical and everything else as an offensive coach, and you're just problem solving. Defensively, there's naturally a little more emotion involved, playing for the guy next to you, all those sort of cliches that are very relevant and real, and having to do everything is 11 guys. Offensively, if 9 guys do their job correctly, you can still score points. You can still do enough.
Yep.
Defensively, if you get anything less than 11, you may get away with it at points, but ultimately you have failed. If 11 guys aren't doing their job for the most part, that makes it much more tough. And with a young team that I would argue in a lot of ways doesn't know what they don't know, Jim Schwartz has the ability to potentially instill an amount of discipline and expectation that can sort of allow them to reach higher levels in terms of their play than they've seen. That does not necessarily mean that Jim Schwartz is going in there and just has to be an ass kicker. If they don't, live up to the expectation that I think he and they will set for themselves, he can certainly do that. But I think his job first and foremost is to come in and say, look, you guys are clearly talented enough to do this. Are you willing to buy in and sort of set this expectation? And now, as a group, hold each other accountable to reach it. There's a clear difference, and it doesn't necessarily. Then this is where I people get into you got to yell and scream. You don't have to. It can get to that point, but if they are willing to sort of buy into that mentality, it could be really good for this team. And that's sort of really interesting to see. How do guys like Myles Garrett and JOK and Denzel Ward and Grant Delpit and all these players sort of take this and go, on the one hand, they could be like, this is perfect. We have a lot of lead by example guys. He can be the guy that sort of makes everybody else rise to the level that we need them to, or they could be like, man, I don't want to hear this crap. I know what I'm doing and all that. And it could go badly. I hope for the Browns' sake that they sort of look at this and go, we have to be better than this. I love this challenge. I like that he's got a ton of credibility. He's got a Super Bowl ring. I want what he has, and let's work this thing out. I'm inclined to think that is more likely to be the case, but these are the things that they're going to have to figure out as they go through this. So that's where, you look at Jim Schwartz's career and you go, he's been good here. It would suggest that he should be able to hit the ground running, but ultimately the players have to buy in and they have to do what they're asked to do. And they have to it has to be important to them. And clearly in the past 2 years, we've seen varying levels of how important it is to me to be good. I think I'm doing enough to be great, but then finding out the hard way, you're not doing, that this is not what it takes to be a great football player.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it comes down to the players and what they're willing to contribute and what they're willing to put in. And so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Again, I am nervous just in general, and I have 8 more months to worry about this, I guess. Just at how slow of a start this team typically has on defense. And, with the offense thinking that it should be now the consistent piece of this team and they should be getting better. Again, still some question marks there, but I would expect for them to be better, more consistent, Deshaun Watson to look more like himself versus what we saw in the last 6 games. I'm just worried that the defense is going to be trying to figure things out, and there's going to be new players on the team. They're going to have to be learning a new system, or I just don't want to get back into the whole excuses part of the season, where it's like, we got off to a slow start. We're still learning. We're working on our communication, learning a new scheme, all this stuff. And then, we're halfway through the season again. And we're like, is this a good defensive coordinator? Or is it not? What is the threshold of when should we be able to see improvement? And what is that going to look like? I know we talked about this a little bit last week, but now that we have the guy, right? Do we have any more confidence in them being able to correct what was going on last year and start out of the gate strong versus having to go through more than half a season before things finally start to click?
There's a couple answers to your question. It's a good question. First, most of those questions are going to be answered in March and April in terms of the schedule. The March and April, because you're going to either address the defensive line in a meaningful way that says this is a professional operation, or you're not. And if they have a professional operation and you go, okay, and it doesn't mean they have to get Daron Payne or, superstar talent. As we talked about last week, if they can find a bunch of Jacoby Brissett type players to fill in those gaps that are just hardworking, do their job, don't cost a lot of money, and may not be superstars, but just tend to give you more than maybe you're paying for, or give you a little extra.
Can I ask you a question on that, though, Pete? Because I don't know that I have complete faith in outside of Jacoby Brissett. I feel like he's more of an exception than he is anything that's happened on this Browns team. But I feel like when we have players join the Browns team, it's as if they don't ever play above expectation. It's either at meet or slightly below. But yet when we see those same players move on and go to other teams, they seem to be able to find their place on the team. So I'm just like, I'm questioning just in general if I have faith in this staff or these players to be able to have that type of impact.
That is Jim Schwartz's mandate. I mean,
great.
Bottom line, that is what he was hired to do. That is
great.
Has to be what Kevin Stefanski said. This is why you're here.
Okay.
They did not hire Jim Schwartz for 2026. They hired him to be good now.
God,
you know what I mean?
Not.
Like, I mean, sincerely, like he was hired to get this done right now. Now, you know, I wouldn't say that what I would say the idea that the Browns sign players and they aren't good here. I would say it's just a roller coaster. Jadeveon Clowney in 2021 was great. He just was great. And he signs and he's great. Anthony Walker before he got hurt this year was great. Like, so you look at that and you go, yeah, but to your point, John Johnson, I know.
And it's like head scratching.
One of the most infuriating players I've ever encountered. But you know, and by the way, he's a major question mark. Will he be here? I don't know.
I was wondering about him. Yeah.
You know, and that's the other part of this. So like I said, March and April will sort of set the schedule for this group. They're either going to have guys, and obviously we'll talk about this, and I will either, and I'm not going to lie to you and go, Bri, you should feel really good about this because
there's still a lot of puzzle pieces that have to fit in.
No, you're 100% right. So like that is going to, I think I'm not going to speak for you, but I think what you're going to see, you're going to sort of decide for yourself in that period and sort of be like, okay, you know, I can at least see why they should be okay at this point. Or you're just sitting here go, yeah, were we doing this over again? And that's where the rubber is going to meet the road. The other part about that is what Jim Schwartz is going to ask this defense to do. You asked this question for the sake of our listeners. I got all the diagrams, so I know you know. Jim Schwartz relative to Joe Woods is not a whole lot different. They're going to play that.
Is that supposed to make us feel better, Pete?
Well, the thing and the thing I will argue to my dying breath is the scheme was not the issue for Joe Woods. It was implementation, it was communication, and it was just consistency. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can get into. I would argue a lot of that was the youth of the team, but certainly the coaching staff bears a lot of blame for communication issues and some of the things that just did not work, undoubtedly. Even if you're running the exact same thing Joe Woods did, you would like to think that Jim Schwartz is just better at it. He's got the track record that says he's simply better at it. So that's a big part of it. But like in terms of what they're going to do, they're going to play that, the past 2 years, the Browns have played with wide defensive ends with the goal of funneling everything inside. They want to create a bottleneck for the quarterback, try to limit where athletic quarterbacks can go and all those things. Meanwhile, they play a lot of man coverage. They play a lot of cover one, which is with a single high safety, and usually with a you can call it a robber with a guy sort of would be Grant Delpit most likely in this case, playing sort of up in the middle of the field to try to take away that sort of intermediate area. Or if he's going to default to zone, he's going to go cover three deep, pretty basic stuff. Joe Woods did a lot of that. So, you know, there's only so many coverages you can run. So that's the basic stuff. And like Joe Woods, Jim Schwartz is trying to get them to play fast as possible. Where Jim Schwartz has sort of earned his reputation is he's really good at designing and game planning pass rush. He's been phenomenal everywhere he's gone. Defensive linemen absolutely love him because in Jim Schwartz scheme, this is the key difference between he and Joe Woods. Jim Schwartz wants his defensive linemen to make plays, a lot of plays, not
love that
soak up blocks, make plays. And to his credit, Joe Woods wasn't stupid. He that's what he did with Myles Garrett, but this is specifically for those inside guys. They're not going to ask them to do as much two gapping. They're not going to ask guys who cannot try to take on multiple blocks to do that to protect the linebackers. No, they're going to say, get through, go get the ball carrier, make a mess. So Jim Schwartz, this is similar to Joe Woods. He tends to have bigger guys up front to try to create that problem and simultaneously protect the linebackers. But like, there's a lot of direct sort of comparisons. For the Tennessee Titans, they had David Long. He's an undersized linebacker who flies around real fast to make plays. Just like JOK. The same type of thing. Mike Backer, we'll see. It wouldn't surprise me if they re-sign Anthony Walker and Sione Takitaki. But so much of this is going to be what they do with the defensive line. Obviously, Myles Garrett, and we've got to find 3 starters.
Yeah.
Three starters. You can't, there's no getting away from that. And they are not, the Browns will not wait until the draft to draft starters. They will address this either in free agency or trade. Jim Schwartz traditionally has had impact players in the inside of his defensive line, which is something that the Browns have not done, not really tried to do too much. So that'll be the question. Are they going to try to make a big splash and trade? Are they going to try to sign somebody that big? Is somebody going to, a big time player going to be able to get to the market like that? Unclear, but that is sort of the issue there. So in a lot of ways you can go, like if Jim Schwartz just throws his defense on the field, you'll probably go, oh, that looks a lot like what Joe Woods is doing, just in terms of how it looks. Now, it's entirely a matter of who's going to execute better. I also will imagine that Jim Schwartz, having been at this for so long, will have a much more veteran defensive staff, which is probably going to be which is probably going to be a lot more like what the Browns have on the offensive side of the ball. Now, they do have some young coaches over there, but for the most part, they've got grizzled veterans like Stump Mitchell and Bill Callahan and some of those guys, proven entities that have had success. I don't see Jim Schwartz going, hey, I'm going to, hire this kid out of college to coach my DBs. Like he's got a for people old enough to know what these things are, a Rolodex of guys he can go to, including one guy who's, has been mentioned that coaches the defensive line for Arizona this past year. I think his name's Matt Burke. Incidentally, he's a Dartmouth grad, which is just entertaining to me. But that's the other part. I don't, the Browns on the defensive side, other than Jason Tarver, who I suspect they will try to keep. Obviously, that's going to be Schwartz's call. I think part of the reason you have a guy like Schwartz and part of the reason that the Browns were able to attract as many interviews as they have is because Kevin Stefanski is a guy who's going to empower the defensive coordinator. Yeah. And I think in this case, to basically say, this is your baby, and I want you to freaking own it, take control, and sort of establish, a culture and all that, all those cliches. And, there are people who are like unhappy with Kevin Stefanski. They didn't do more of that previously with Joe Woods. I understand where you're coming from, but I also think that made this job appealing. One, being respectful enough for Joe Woods to let him go in a manner that was sort of not just throwing him out, respectful of who he was, the effort he's put in, and allowing him to sort of sink or swim on his own. Ultimately, you can say, and understandably, look, Stefanski, it's your ass on the line. You probably want to get in there and have a little more input and direct this thing, because if you lose, you fail. But I think part of why Kevin Stefanski is able to attract assistant coaches is because he trusts them to do their job. He's not there to micromanage. They're all grown-ass men, and allow them to do it. And he's going to sort of say to Jim Schwartz, do it. I'm going to give you, if you say to the defensive guys, we're going to do this, I've got your back. You take care of it. I'm going to, if players complain about it, I'm there. That part is where I think it can be a very smooth transition and hit the ground running. I think it can do all those things. But in this case, I'm not to say that the coaching isn't a question mark. They've got to prove it. But I think it's more about the the Jimmies and the Joes, as opposed to X's and O's in this particular case.
I also read he likes to show exotic looks. That's like the buzzword, right?
Yes.
Buzzword on the
100%.
on the Twitter streets as well. It's just
that's sort of what the questions I have with him. He has been a consultant with the Tennessee Titans for 2 years. Mike Vrabel does not run Jim Schwartz's scheme. He has run even, odd front, all kinds of different looks. He runs a million different coverages. Mike Vrabel has done his own thing. I'm curious, whether it's just adding more of the exotic looks, or if he wants to, if there's anything, in the 2 years of just sort of hanging out and doing this thing where he's like, no, I really like that. I want to incorporate that. And that does not mean he's going to change the whole defense. With the NFL, everybody's always evolving. Everybody's always figuring out how to beat everybody else. You sort of always have to, keep figuring out, not necessarily ways to reinvent yourself necessarily, more so come up with new answers to evolving problems. Yeah. So what does that look like? Are we going to see some of the, are we going to see him sort of evolve the way Dan Quinn has evolved? Dan Quinn, the current defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys, has had a significant amount of success this season, but he's a long way away from the guy who is running Pete Carroll's, base cover 3 defense with the Seahawks. Jim Schwartz has been at this a long time. He's a very smart guy, and he's not afraid to say it. I'm curious to know what he's sort of incorporated, what he's taking away, and what that looks like for him. Obviously, you mentioned John Johnson. I don't know what the answer to that is. In a lot of ways, it might be an awkward fit. Maybe they go in a different direction. Maybe he adapts the scheme to sort of figure it out, or maybe he feels good about John Johnson as is. That's obviously we're probably not getting an answer to that into a press conference, but again, March and April. What does that look like? And addressing those different aspects of this thing to sort of get it going forward. But nothing about this to me says, let's see if we can figure this out. It all says what I've said all along. It's all about 2023.
Yeah. And I do think we'll know a lot more as the next few months go by. When Andrew Berry took over the general manager position within this organization, he talked about how he was going to aggressively go after talent. I think he has done that, particularly in signing free agents, going after Deshaun Watson specifically. I mean, he hasn't been afraid to take risks either, in the sense of signing guys on 1-year deals. Some of those have panned out, some of them have not. So I would expect that this offseason would be no different, in a sense that they got their new defensive coordinator. If they don't have the right pieces to fit within his scheme or what he wants to do, I do fully expect Andrew Berry to go out and get him the players. It will be interesting to see what that looks like. I know he typically doesn't sign, the star players, if you will. I'd be fine if they went and did that. I mean, you have to think at some point, in Andrew Berry's mind, and even Kevin Stefanski in a sense, is there was such a big gamble on Deshaun Watson that there is a lot riding on 2023. Like, I do think there is a lot of pressure on this team to perform, just given the fact of they put all their chips into a Deshaun Watson basket. They're going to need to prove it, Pete. And I know we were all kind of not joking, but in a way, with the suspension this year in 2022, it did feel like kind of a throwaway season of, hey, if they win, great. If we make the playoffs, great. Not fully expecting to be there, because that wasn't part of the plan. But now as we go into 2023, they put pressure on themselves. And I think they all know that. They're smart enough to understand and know that there's going to be a lot riding on this season. So it's going to be interesting to see how aggressive he is, who they're going after. I mean, there's some pieces on offense that I think are missing that haven't panned out. So, I mean, as a Browns fan, I think it's exciting to see this all unfold. But again, as fans are expecting to see this team perform like they should based on how the roster is constructed. And if they get even better, then you better be a playoff team, Pete. That's all I'm saying.
There's no getting around that unless the team plane crashes.
Oh, gosh,
there's just like, you would have to have something just catastrophic happen to be able to go, no, it's okay. It's just, there's too much. Now, here's the thing. We all talk about pressure, and there is pressure, but the thing with Kevin Stefanski is, like, he never acts like a guy who's pressured.
No, he's very much one game at a time, right? He never thinks ahead. And even if he does, he definitely doesn't show it or talk about it.
Well, not only that, but just he has not changed who he is for anyone, not only personally, but in terms of how he calls games. He's been, if you want to call it, defiant when people are trying to criticize him for being so aggressive in things or doing the things he did. He does not blink. And you know, and I think that's really important. That's part of the reason I think he can be successful is because he's not sitting there going, well, if I have to do it this way to get media people off my back or to get people to stop booing us at home or whatever it is. His attitude, and the one he should have, is the only people he has to answer to, really, other than his bosses, are the 53 guys in that locker room.
Yeah.
And that's the only people that should really matter. And like, this is a hard thing for some fans to understand, like with this whole accountability thing. It ain't about us. It's about those 53 guys in the locker room, or 90 as we get into the summer. Those are the only guys that he has to worry about in terms of doing right by. So there's pressure inherent on every coach. I mean, you're an NFL coach. Welcome to the life. I mean, Lovie Smith should not have had any pressure with the Houston Texans, and they fired him for a year. Now, that was predictable given their track record, but nevertheless, there should have been zero pressure, and yet there's pressure. The second he took the Browns job, pressure. But to me, I think he looks at this and goes, this is everything I've ever wanted. I've got the quarterback I want. Mm-hmm. I've now got the defensive coordinator I want. I've got, a lot of the talent I want. This is nothing but opportunity for me. Let's freaking do this. We'll see how that goes. But
that's a different perspective.
But I think you have to, if you're him, think of it this way. Look, there are things that I think they wish would have gone differently. Defensive linemen, wide receivers, certain other things they would be. Yeah, they wish, player A, B, and C were better than they are. But if you were to sort of illustrate Kevin Stefanski's dream of being a head coach, it is this situation he's in right now.
Yeah.
I don't think they look at this. I don't think Andrew Berry does either. I think they look at this and go, they sort of embrace the idea that you're hired to get fired. It sounds like, I'm completely reading into this, but it sounds like maybe they've got more support from ownership than people want to acknowledge or sort of admit. That they're sort of looking at this and going, we've been waiting for this our whole careers. This is the best thing ever. So we'll see, because I think that is how they will approach this. And ultimately, if we're sitting here and they're, 9-8 and out of the playoffs, who knows? I mean, it could be a tough spot. If they're like 4-13, I don't know if we'll have a podcast anymore at that point. That may be the end of Bri with this, but then it's over. You know what's going to happen. But I think they have to look at this in coaching. I don't think a lot of these guys, if you're thinking about getting fired, it's probably done.
Yeah, you're doomed.
You're probably already over. So you're thinking of this entirely from the standpoint of, this is what I want to do. This is everything I've ever wanted. Let's go and try to see how we can do.
Yeah, you can't coach with fear. I get that. You can't go into this just having fear that you're constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for something to happen and for you to get fired. So that's a fair point. I guess the perspective is from a pressure standpoint, like we know how the Haslams are. We know that they aren't super patient. Now that could all change. I mean, if they truly believe that they found their GM that they want to stick with, which is Andrew Berry. And I believe that just given his track record in terms of other front offices looking to hire his talent, like that should actually say a lot, just in a sense of being more of a progressive organization and funneling talent through the Browns organization. I think the Haslams, as owners of the Cleveland Browns, they do have egos. And I think that side of things probably feeds into their ego. So as much as I think they want to win football games too, I do think there is a lot to be said about just their mutual respect for the staff that they've hired and how other teams in the league also respect the organization in terms of who is in their front office and other teams that are hiring the staff that they've put together. So it'd be really nice to have this translate into wins on the football field, as we would all like to see happen. I'm gonna spin it on a positive side, Pete. I'm gonna hold out hope that we're gonna see the change that we've all wanted to see. It's all gonna work out.
Well,
But I'm still gonna be guarded.
Yeah, well, I think you have every right to be. I think that's the healthiest perspective you can have on this. Prove it. You know what I mean? Like, we've all waited for 2020 was a lot of fun, but we've all sort of waited for this thing to
Yeah, it shouldn't be a flash in the pan.
Yeah,
it should just be the norm.
Right. So I totally understand it, and the only part, and I don't think you're going to fall into this, is if they start winning games, you're not going to be, well, I've seen this before. Like, I'm not going to enjoy this as we go. I think you're a healthy enough person who's going to be like,
I will enjoy every single one.
Yes, you're going to enjoy the ride as long as it's a good ride.
Yeah, it's like the people that complain about the ugly wins. I mean, I get it. Sometimes it's not pretty, but a win is a win is a win.
Right. So the Browns hired Schwartz, which is very interesting. Like I said, I did not have a horse in this race, but I was very intrigued by what I've sort of learned about other candidates. Brian Flores was very interesting because he's the most aggressive hire they could have made in terms of what he wants to do defensively. He likes to send cover zero, full on blitzes. In his time with Miami, I think he did it like 10% of the time, where he's just sending the house. And if you watched the Dolphins and the Bills game, you saw some of that, even though he's not the defensive coordinator there or head coach there, but they still do some of those things. And it's fun when it works. Obviously, still somehow there were people sitting there going, hey, maybe we should recycle Greg Williams again. There's clearly an appeal for people who just love to just send things flying at the offense and hope it works. And to Flores' credit, he had a ton of success. The flip side of that is, one, obviously, like we said, Brian Flores wants to be a head coach. And I certainly, I would not have said, oh, we shouldn't hire Brian Flores because he's only going to be here a year. I want to win. And if he's going to help us win for a year, I'm fine with that. Let's go. But like, if you watch the Dolphins and the Bills, you sort of see where after a while you see them blitz and you see them blitz and you see them blitz. And then they go, wait a minute, the Bills keep completing passes and they're not, it's not working, and they're getting beat doing this, and they're making plays down the field. And that's sort of the trap you get into. It's a lot of fun when it works and it produces a lot of highlights. And there's some plays where they caused sacks and they got the fumble and scored the touchdown and all this. And you're like, man, this is great. But it's risk reward, and that's perfectly fine. I think what that really amounts to is you're taking an offensive mindset to defense. You're saying, I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to make plays. And if I make plays, that will stop you, or you're going to make a mistake, or you're going to get a turnover. And I think for a guy like Kevin Stefanski, there's a huge amount of appeal to that, because that's how he operates the offensive side. It's not a matter of, I need to stop you. It's entirely a matter of possessions. Turnovers give you more possessions. In addition to keeping them on the board, you get turnovers, you tend to win, unless you're the Chargers. The more possessions you create, the better chances you have to win. Obviously, turnover differential is a huge advantage overall. Teams that have a positive turnover differential tend to do well. So I totally understand why that would be appealing. Again, former head coach. We've talked about this, why that would be appealing to him. He's got a tough mindset. There's a lot of players who have a ton of respect for him. I'm curious to know. My suspicion is Deshaun Watson would have been very happy to have Brian Flores, because at some point they were theoretically going to be paired together in Miami. So that part would have been an interesting dynamic, that, you have some of your offensive guys be like, yeah, I love this. And it's possible he had a different view. I don't know, but that's sort of the sense I would have gotten, that would have been a big hire for him specifically. Ultimately, if they get stops and hold the team down, give him the opportunity to win the game, he's going to be happy. But that part was interesting to me. I likewise was really intrigued by Sean Desai. Sean Desai is a really interesting guy, because he came to football as a coach, as somebody who did not play it. And he is an Indian American. He would have been the first. He's a pioneer on that front. in the same way that Robert Saleh is a pioneer in sort of being, I believe he's Egyptian on that front. And like, there's always that element of, it's the Browns historically are a very progressive franchise. They've broken a lot of barriers on that front. When the original 5 players that were integrated into the league, the Browns signed 2 or 3 of them, Bill Willis and Marion Motley. I think it's just those 2. Obviously, Andrew Berry, Catherine Raish, all these people they've hired. When they had Glenn Cook and they had Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, that was I have to believe that was the first entirely black front office in terms of the top 3 guys. So they had all these things. So like, there's this element that made that appealing for him. But the thing that made Sean Desai really appealing, one, which is, I think, made him sort of controversial. He went to, wait for it, Boston University. You know what Boston University does not have? Doesn't have a football team. So when he was going to Boston University, he was coaching like freshman football or as assistant high school coach while he was going there. And then he graduates from there with a number of degrees that are interesting, but ultimately his field is in teaching. He goes to Columbia in the Ivy League or the Patriot League, one of them, and gets his master's, starts as an adjunct professor of all things. And his whole background is education. So you can there was a part of me that was really rooting for this just because I knew what was going to happen and I was going to enjoy all.
Can you imagine? I can't even imagine.
Like, you read about him and everybody loves him. Everywhere he's gone, everybody loves him. And he had a ton of success with getting individual players to play well on a horrible Bears
Well,
defense.
if he has a degree in teaching, that makes sense.
Yes, like,
so much of this is just being able to relate to people on a personal level.
100%. And yet, we want, the
spitting and yelling, Pete.
Yes.
Spitting.
Well, and
grunting.
Then,
maybe some grunting.
And then, and then somebody was trying to argue with me that one of the skills that's important to have as a head coach is being able to work the officials, which is just, come on. But anyway, so he's a teacher by trade. He's had a ton of success. And like, one of the big things he was able to do with the Chicago Bears in 2021, Robert Quinn had 18 and a half sacks that year. His career high was 19, which was way back in 2013. And there, beyond that 19 sack season he had in 2013, his next highest was 11.5. He goes to the Bears, 18 and a half sacks. And the idea, and by the way, Robert Quinn's going to be a free agent. So this idea that Desai comes here potentially, and Robert Quinn's like, hell yes, because currently he has 1 sack with the Eagles, 1, to be able to go, hey, I really like this. And all you hear from players is he gets it. He understands, again, being a teacher, he understands how to relate to people, all these wonderful things you want to hear, but he doesn't have those sort of like familiar trappings. And in his case, his track record is very limited. He's only been a defensive coordinator technically once, although it's worth pointing out, even though he's not the defensive coordinator of the Seahawks, he's like the associate head coach, and Pete Carroll allowed him to transform their defense for the first time since he's been with the Seahawks, because he's that impressed with him.
Yeah.
And you can say that, well, they've had middling results. I would argue that the Seahawks don't have a ton of talent. Certainly they have talent in places the Browns don't, as somebody is quick to point out. They have a better defensive line. Well, no shit. And some of the other things, but he was very impressive. Now, again, maybe he's a gamble, but just that part of it was very appealing to me. Again, like you said, it's teaching is the job. You are ultimately a teacher. Yes, there's passion, there's all these other things and getting guys motivated. But I got news for you. Whether it's on the football field in the classroom, the challenge is the same. It's just the different ways of doing it. You've got to get people interested in learning if you're a teacher, which is arguably more difficult than playing sports. So I found him very endearing from that standpoint. But having said all that, I have no idea if he would have been the right choice. And the Browns may have just decided he wasn't ready for it, or it's possible he decided he didn't want the job. I don't know what the answer to that is. That path not chosen was interesting to me.
Yes, but as you said, I can't even imagine the just disaster Browns Twitter would have been. I mean, I feel like it was kind of getting to that point.
Yes.
Late last night, yesterday, and early this morning, because
a lot of people were afraid they were.
He was the last interview, right?
No, the last guy was, I believe, Denard Wilson, who's an Eagles assistant. He's the one I know the least about.
Okay, well, because I thought I saw that the Browns posted that they had interviewed Desai yesterday.
Oh, wait. No, you're right. Right. Desai was the last guy. Wilson was over.
And then I think Mary Kay like came out. I don't know if it was late last night or like early this morning. Like the Browns are going to make their decision, and I feel like it was because of the timing of when he interviewed, and then that report came out that they were ready to make their decision. Everyone just automatically assumed he was going to get the job, so it was just like full on meltdown mode. I'm like, of course they're gonna hire the guy that like nobody knows, and he's an analytics nerd and all this stuff.
Well, he apparently has a relationship with Kevin Stefanski already. They apparently know each other.
Okay.
So like, I had people going, "Why are we even doing this? It's going to be a size." It's like, why are we assuming this? And like, that was what made the Schwartz hire all the more funny, is because we sort of
got worked up into a shoot.
Well, we got all these people worked up about 3 other candidates by the time, and then they sort of went back. It was like, oh, they hired Schwartz. It was like, it was very anticlimactic from that standpoint. Like, that's why, as I said, all I wanted was an honest process, and I feel like we got that. And who knows? Brian Flores said to the Browns, "Screw this, I'm not coming.
I'm not doing this."
Or Desai said, I don't feel like this is a good situation. I don't know the answer,
which is all fine,
but
all fine.
That's why you interview.
Yes,
that's why you go through this process. You want to find the best fit. So that was really interesting to me. And the other guy who came up, and like I said, I know very little about Denard Wilson. I know he's an Eagle assistant. And another young guy. It was interesting. The Browns went all young guys except Schwartz. He's like the elder statesman, and they went with the old guy. Because I thought the Browns were going to go younger. Not that Schwartz wouldn't have been a good choice or
following the trend.
But they just defensively, especially in the NFL, everybody talks about the young hot coordinators for offense. There's a lot of this going on the defensive side of the ball, where guys like D'Amico Ryans and Evero from the Broncos, who's getting interviews and all this, that these guys, that's young guys that are sort of in vogue on defensive side, and that they're really, sort of becoming the new thing in terms of like changing how defense is being played and all these other things. So it was interesting. And one other guy who fit in that category, who everybody was sort of speculating as the game was going on, was one Brandon Staley, the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, and the game that was between him and the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is a really interesting game. Obviously, the game starts and everything goes against the Jaguars initially. Trevor Lawrence throws 4 picks. I think all of them were in the first.
I went to bed. I was like, I'm not going to stay up and watch. Like, this is so stupid. I'm going to go to bed. And then I woke up and I was like, is this a joke? Like, was this like a parody account when I saw the ESPN highlight on my screen that they came back and won? I mean, I can't even believe it.
It was a really interesting thing because it sort of posed conventional wisdom against being super aggressive. Early in the game, Doug Peterson was super aggressive. They passed up what I believe would have been a 51-yard field goal, went for it on 4th and 7. Trevor Lawrence throws an ugly interception. He is lambasted by critics, including certain local media folks who go, you can't do that. You got to take the points. You got to take the points. You got to take the points. He didn't take the points. He threw a pick. You know who took the points? The Chargers, over and over and over again. They had a 22-yard field goal, a 23-yard field goal. So they got stopped on the 4 and the 5, and they had one reasonably long field goal, 4th and 11 from the, like a 51-yard field goal or something like that, 50-yard field goal. Cameron Dicker made, which is great. And they would have been fine with all of those. They go up 27-0 in the first half. Jacksonville finally scores at the end of the first half, and then you sort of like, oh, this is going to be over. The Chargers come out and get another field goal. That's the 50-yarder in the second half. And the Jaguars remain aggressive. Doug Peterson did not change his approach. The moment where it really mattered was in the fourth quarter on, I think, like the 22-yard line of the Jaguars. It's 4th and 3. Brandon Staley, who was the most aggressive coach in 2021, what was like made Kevin Stefanski look like a pussy, opts to go take the field goal. 40-yard attempt. It's 30-20 at this point. Field goal puts you up 2 scores as opposed to 2 scores. which is never a smart way to go. He would know this, but it just feels like he got so browbeaten by media and by, critics and potentially by ownership. We're not clear, but it sounds like he probably did. And he went against everything he's ever done, and he goes and tries to take the field goal. Cameron Dicker misses a 40-yard field goal, hooks it to the left, still 30-20. What makes that play really interesting is that on the 3rd and 3 play, the Chargers got called for holding, or the Jaguars got called for holding. The Chargers got called for holding. The Jaguars said, no, we'll decline the penalty. Instead of 3rd and 13, we want 4th and 3. Why? They wanted them to attempt the field goal. They did not think they would go for it. If they convert that 4th and 3 from the 22-yard line or whatever with Justin Herbert, a great quarterback who has mobility, everything you could possibly want in that situation. If they convert that and ultimately score, it's a 3-score game. They win. Just that at that point, you would now need a miracle to come back from that deficit. 3-score lead. Instead, even if they made the field goal, it's still been a 2-score game, but they missed it. So immediately you get punished for going conservative. Oh, but you got to take the points on the road. You have to take the points on the road. Jacksonville scores a touchdown. They manage to get a stop. Joey Bosa throws just a world-class fit. Your children are more well-behaved than Joey Bosa, who then had an all-time cry fest over the officials after the game, which was just not going to end well for him. Not going to end well for him. When he basically decided that the officials are targeting him and laughing at his misery. I'm sure that will go over well. So they get the touchdown. They get a key stop. They get the ball back. And then, a 4th and 1, they run that very creative toss to Travis Etienne out of the T. Freaking, 3 backs in that T formation, flex tight end. They go toss to the right. It goes 25 yards down the field. Travis Etienne, knowing the situation, understanding where they're at, basically stays in bounds to make sure they can run the clock, and they get the game-winning field goal. Now, somebody's going to sit there and go, well, if Cameron Dicker makes that field goal, they would have to go to the end zone. They had plenty of time. And yes, maybe the Chargers get a stop there, but ultimately the Chargers had the ability to win the game right there at that 4th and 3, convert it. Even if they missed it, it was still a 2-score game. And they didn't. And they lost by doing everything everybody yells at Kevin Stefanski to do. And yes, you'll go, that's anecdotal. That's fine. The Dallas Cowboys last night, over the caution and the consternation from one Troy Aikman, Dak Prescott, play action fake out of the back, keeper into the end zone. Instead of going up 9-0, they go up 12-0. And they basically run away with the game at that point. People are going, and there are people that are just never going to get it. They're going to continue to go, you got to take points on the road and all this other crap. Every team that was aggressive was rewarded for it this weekend. The Chargers did not go for a single 4th down in that game. The Jacksonville Jaguars went for 3, the interception and 2 4th and 1s. And neither one of those 4th and 1s was a quarterback sneak. Both of them involved one in the throw and then the toss. So people desperately want Kevin Stefanski to change. He has the right idea, and he can literally, hopefully he was, he's obviously processing interviews and stuff. He's watching this game and going, yeah, this is what I do. Doug Peterson looks like a genius. He's a hero. He's hailed as all these other things, believing in his quarterback, sticking with it the whole way. And now he's gutsy, gritty, all the things, as opposed to being stupid and reckless like he was when they threw a 4th and 7 interception. To me, I hope people saw this and went like, wow, that's stupid. And I suspect for people who sort of look at it those terms, they probably are like, yeah, be aggressive. But I expect there are holdouts who sit there and go, no, you got to keep taking field goals. The Jacksonville Jaguars scored 4 touchdowns on that game. The Chargers scored 3. Jacksonville won the game. Touchdowns are just worth so much more. They're worth the effort. You're rarely going to be in situations where field goals are going to win you games. It doesn't mean field goal kicking isn't important. In fact, it seems like the NFL went out of their way to make the Browns more sort of be a little more grateful and patient with one Cade York, especially if you watch Brett Maher miss 4 extra points.
Oh, poor guy.
But it was just fascinating to me watching this and seeing that, continuously fortune favors the bold. Are there going to be situations where being aggressive backfires? Undoubtedly. We saw that with the Browns this season, but it's process over results. You want to keep seeing them do that. You want to keep believing it because I truly believe, and the math continues to support this. I know people don't like the math, but now you get to watch the game and say, okay, I saw it, and go, yes, being aggressive, adopting that mentality is good for what the Browns ultimately want to do.
I'm good with it. Stay aggressive. We'll have to timestamp this and come back to it next year.
That's true. Last thing, Jadeveon Clowney. This was embarrassing to come out. I could be wrong on this. I should probably double check, but I'm fairly sure he came out. I'm sorry if I offended anyone. But to then follow that up with but I was misquoted and all this other stuff.
And actually, he only apologized, I think, to Myles Garrett and Myles Garrett's family.
Yes, it was just the ultimate half-assed. It was as if his mom.
A week later, by the way.
It was as if his mom walked him up to the Browns' door and knocked on the door and made him apologize. And you got that sort of crap. And you saw that with the agent who released a statement, who I basically translated basically read to me as, I had nothing to do with this. Please don't hold this against me. By the way, my client would please like his money. Now Myles Garrett is the Jadeveon Clowney is sort of realizing the damage he's done to himself, and yet still cannot help himself, and has to blame Mary Kay Cabot. And I don't want to make it into a gender thing, because that's immediately what jumps out to me, that you're going, oh, this woman who, sort of this inherent woman doesn't know football or something like this, or something like that, misquoted me and I'm a victim or some of that crap.
Well, I think honestly on his side, he was smart in a sense of Mary Kay, for whatever reason, has a lot of people that don't like her or think that she's just out to get the Browns or the players or just cause additional discourse. So I do think he was smart on that sense of essentially trying to twist it around back on her to save face. It is weird that it was like a full week later. I was just like, at that point, like, people already forgot about it. I mean, they didn't really, but like, now you're bringing it up again.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it was too little too late, Jadeveon.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, however people feel about Mary Kay Cabot in Northeast Ohio, she has a lot more credibility outside of Ohio.
Yeah.
Like, people listen to her. People, she goes on national programs. She has enough sort of clout to be able to do that. That's the part that it was funny to me, is like, yeah, that probably works for like a handful of people in Ohio that don't like Mary Kay Cabot, but it doesn't work for 31 NFL teams. I don't think it helps at all. In fact, I think he hurt himself more. And my immediate thought was there were certain other, perhaps orange, leatherish reporters that former reporters that maybe he should have gone to and said these quotes to, and then he could say, I didn't actually say this. And a lot of people were like, oh, of course not.
Yeah.
Because he's the same guy who claims that Paul DePodesta is allowing Kevin Stefanski to continue living if only he does things his way. What I think it really did ultimately is, I think it doesn't excuse the Browns for the problems they've had, but I think it really sort of crystallized that this particular problem was its own problem. Yes. That even though the Browns have real issues, and potentially the hire of Jim Schwartz is there to address some of these issues, that Clowney is just a buffoon unto himself. And that ultimately, I think he sort of helped the Browns out in that standpoint. Now, the people who don't like Kevin Stefanski, the people who don't like this coaching staff or the organization, whatever, are not going to change their mind based on that. But I think for people who had, I think, more honest questions about it, that maybe this was that one, don't understand that Clowney's track record is what it is. Interestingly enough, he's coming from the Tennessee Titans, where Jim Schwartz is familiar with Clowney's work and his blame and his inability to take it. But it just helps to sort of isolate Clowney into being the jackass that he proved to be on this one, and just be able to go, yes, the Browns have issues. They have to solve, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. They need leadership. They need accountability. They need all these things. They need to sort of change what that aspect of the team is. But Jadeveon Clowney is his own problem, and we can move on and sort of go, okay, on to the next thing. And I think that has largely happened. I think people are sort of, that's the other part of this where I think Jadeveon Clowney did a favor to the Browns. He made it very easy for them to be like, okay, we're moving on. There's no longer a lingering question of, are we going to be sitting here in June waiting for Jadeveon Clowney to make a decision and resign? They're going to have done something else long before that. And there's not going to be a what if or any lingering regrets about, well, maybe they should have revisited the Clowney thing. It gives them a clean break and they can sort of move on.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So, yeah, look, we will have, obviously the Browns helped us out today, as they often do. They consult with us to make sure that
that's right.
This is when we can announce these things. They helped us out with the Schwartz hire today. Obviously, next week we'll have more info on Schwartz, more playoff games to talk about, and continuing to see where this thing's going to go. I would imagine by then we'll have a better idea of where the assistants on the defensive staff are going to go. As I said, I think the only guy who has a chance of staying is Jason Tarver. I think everybody, maybe they keep one of those like quality control guys somewhere along the line. But I think ultimately it's going to be a whole lot of people leaving. And I think most of them sort of knew that. Chris Kiffin, I think part of the reason he was willing to say what he said was because he sort of knew where this was going. And some of those guys who just weren't very good, including your boy, Jeff Howard, the defensive backs coach. I think you're going to see a whole new staff. And maybe they don't keep Tarver, but Tarver's the one guy I could sit there and go, look, you want linebackers to operate on a relative shoestring budget. Jason Tarver has gotten a lot out of them. He seems capable of coaching them to play in your system. If he's going to interview, obviously, and if Schwartz likes him, then they'll keep him. If not, they'll go in a different direction. But anyway, with all that being said, we will be back next week to talk about all of it.